Let us begin by respectfully acknowledging that we meet for this talk on the traditional land of the Odawa, Potawatomi, and other Anishinaabe people who were forced to relocate when a contingent of Dutch settlers moved into this area in 1847. We recognize the continuing presence of Anishinaabe on this land and their unique and enduring relationship with their traditional territories. We recognize, too, that those of us from Western cultures have not treated the land well. We have an obligation to clean up the pollution and reduce the suburban sprawl that has poisoned and damaged the land, air, and water in so many ways. Here's a quote to keep in mind from journalist Levi Reichert. That is, knowing our history helps us know our place in this world. I'll say that again. Knowing our history helps us know our place in this world. I was present at an Indigenous peoples lecture here at Hope College with Levi discussing the impact of boarding schools on Native peoples in the US. Listening to survivor stories, there was a common theme that tied them together. They had all lost their cultural ties. Like some of the stories I heard, I realized I too had internalized those external narratives and hierarchies that underscored my sense of identity. Prior to attending this lecture, I had been on the path of relearning my history so that I could find belonging in my community. Born and raised in West Michigan in the early 2000s as a child of Mexican immigrants, I grew up experiencing the uniqueness of our food, music, and even the popular pet name, Firulais, which finds its origins in the English phrase, free of lice. Who would have known that the name stems from US authorities enforcing the Bracero program? This program, which in the 1950s required Mexican farm workers that migrated to the US to be flea-free. In elementary school, I began to gain a deeper understanding of how different my immediate household environment was from my peers, the majority of which were white. At this point, I had no knowledge about the deeper history behind something like the name Firulais, and to me, it was a common pet name and nothing more. I didn't even understand the grammar or history behind the Spanish my parents had taught me, and I had to dedicate time to learning it by reading magazines like El Vocero and El Informador, which are common in Mexican supermarkets around Grand Rapids. Being in West Michigan, I was separated from the intricacies of the localized culture my parents grew up in due to it not being present in the same capacity. While Grand Rapids is substantially diverse compared to other parts of West Michigan, I am still a minority. And subsequently, I was treated like one growing up, and I faced your typical discrimination from your unfriendly neighborhood racist. What surprised me most, however, was the discrimination that was prevalent within our own social group, comprised of Mexicans who had stronger ties to their homeland. The discrimination was often multifaceted. However, for many of us, the reality was that we had internalized colorist beliefs, including me. The conflict of my identity as a Mexican threatened my acceptance of our culture. So I went up to my mom and dad, and I told them, I'm a white American, and I hate Mexico. Nevertheless, I couldn't refute the obvious truth that was my skin, with all its brown glory. In my attempts to assimilate, none of them were successful. I couldn't embrace my identity as a Mexican because the culture just wasn't as pervasive as US pop culture. And I couldn't embrace my identity as a US citizen because others just refused to see me that way, even though I literally have the right documentation. From there on, I simply drifted around confused until I was made aware that there were other people that weren't Mexicans, but like me, Latinos, a super broad pan-ethnic term that seemed to unify many different people, including Mexicans. This little revelation gave me a sense of belonging, and it held me over until I reached my high school graduation in 2022. I accepted that I was Latino until my dad revealed that I had Indigenous Purepecha ancestry through my grandfather, but I hadn't understood how defining this trait was at the time. It was only here at Hope College in a class titled Spanish for Heritage Speakers I found myself deeply intrigued by the history of Latinidad, the concept of being Latino. My professor said one statement that cascaded through my head, leading to a rebirth of my search for truth and belonging. Latinidad dates back to ancient Roman times, not referring to people from South and Central America, but instead to descendants from an area around the city of Rome, Latium. We then dove into the revival of Latinidad in the 19th century as a means to categorize groups that declared independence from Spanish rule. Following mass declarations of independence from Spanish powers, US intervention in Latin America was on the rise, and many economies were destabilized. Among those was Mexico's, my country of descendants. A major intervention was the Mexican-American War. The US sequestered and annexed much of Mexico's land that used to reach up into Texas and Northern California. Reeling from the loss of many valuable resources and the heavy disruption of social and cultural life, many people immigrated to the US in search of better economic opportunities. And Mexico is not unique in this. The US interrupted many countries, like Nicaragua, for example, when they sought to build a pro-slavery state. And while the US's efforts remained largely unsuccessful, it's estimated that tens of thousands of Nicaraguans were displaced as a result. Latinidad has unified many people that had been disrupted, like us, like the Nicaraguans, like the people from South and Central America, and has led to many positive changes. In the US, it has provided a shared identity and aided diverse groups in gaining political power and agency. Like when we all sought civil justice in the 1960s Chicano movement, and we exclaimed, "Sí se puede, yes we can," from streets declaring that others will no longer dictate our future. However, we have reached a critical moment where we must now ask ourselves, ¿qué se puede? What can we do? What can we do as a community to better represent ourselves? In the exploration of my identity, I realized that my history was so much more than just Latino. Latinidad explains what happened when unique BIPOC folk were destabilized, hence my ancestry. So, I had to take a deeper dive, and what I found was disappointing. While there is evidence of this rich culture with beautiful traditions, there is a distinct lack of text and media to grasp the culture that I descend from. And us Purépechas aren't unique in this. The stories at Levi's lecture resonated with the history of my people. Both of us lost much of our cultures, and many of us are starting to find our way back, including me. If we don't take back our identities now, we risk losing them forever. I am not advocating that we cancel or remove Latinidad altogether, but that we engage in critical conversations, highlighting its limitations, while appreciating the shared history and cultures it has bridged. As a pan-ethnic community that risks erasing the influences of many underrepresented communities, it is our responsibility to focus on amplifying unique BIPOC voices in social media, political representation, and even among our local organizations in the greater Holland community. This means participating in local efforts to clean up the sacred land, attending events that emphasize underrepresented experiences, local especially, and supporting legislation that bolsters the rights of BIPOC people. This dialogue on Latinidad serves as a lesson to all that accurate representation matters, especially within our relative communities. I am standing here today, proud to say that I have found my current belonging at Hope. My name is Marco López-Vargas. Latino by consequence, and Indigenous Purepecha. Thank you for listening.